Aparna, you want to do a little bit of an intro? We can dive into it.
Awesome. Yeah. I'll go first. So, hey everyone, my name is Aparna. I'm one of the founders here at Arise. Technical background, was an ML engineer for many years and um, really excited about what we're going to dig in today.
Yeah. And hey everyone, I'm Sally, and I'm a product manager here at Rise on Aparna's team. I am also from a technical background, and today I work a lot on our Copilot, which is an AI assistant to observe AI. So definitely have some hands-on experience with a lot of the things that we deal with in our day-to-day. So today we're going to be talking about the OpenAI real-time API, like I mentioned, and I think for our structure today, we'll do just a little bit of a quick overview of what it is, how it works, some of the key features, and then we're going to spend most of our time in the real-time console, playing around with it, kind of digging into the logs, things like that in their docs. So it should be a good one. All right. So with that, just kind of setting the scene in case anybody is not familiar with what the real-time API is. It's a tool by OpenAI that enables real-time, low-latency interactions between users and AI models. It's super kind of conversational. It feels like natural conversation when you're interacting with it. It's super fast, and it supports both text and audio, and it can do it both at the same time, which is really cool. Some of the key features are its low latency streaming, so that it ensures that there's minimal delay for natural conversational interactions. This is because of its WebSocket based approach. So instead of using like just a standard like HTTP request, it's using WebSockets. So this is bi-directional kind of communication happening, and that's what allows it to have this back and forth with the user and respond really fast. It does have multimodal capabilities, like I mentioned, so it can handle both text and audio, and it supports function calling. And I think this is one of the key features here because I think without function calling capabilities, it would be a lot less useful and a lot less valuable. But because we have this function calling support, you can imagine how complex of the applications you can create with this API. So you have this super fast interaction. You can have a bunch of tools powering it, and so it's definitely a really powerful tool. So that's kind of setting the scene there a little bit. I want to introduce y'all to the OpenAI real-time console. So we're going to be playing around with this. If you haven't played around, I highly recommend it. I always tell anybody who's trying to kind of ramp up on this API or learn more about voice interactions to download this repo and start the console. I love that it's only 2 lines to get it started, so it's super duper easy. And I think it just gives you a really good feel for how this API works, and you can see all of the events and the different voice modes that you can have. And I think for me, when this was first released, I don't think I would be able to understand how this was really working without this type of console. So I definitely recommend trying it out.
Um,
Um,
this is
yeah.
gonna be, I think it'd be super helpful just to, yeah, jump in and give a demo as we go into it. And what we'll do is we'll kind of jump into a demo, show the real-time voice API, and then we'll also walk through a little bit of how to, you know, how the events look of the actual API so that if you're debugging this, you actually can, point out what to look at. And
Yeah.
then these events are also going to be a critical part of how you can actually evaluate these types of systems. So, um, awesome. Go ahead, Sally.
Yeah. And so I have it running. I ran those 2 lines that I showed you in the repo. Now it's waiting for me to connect. Setting the scene a little bit, I want to point out that there are 2 functions that this real-time API application is built with. One of them is a weather API, and the other one is just setting memory. So if you see kind of things pop up over here, it's the functions. So all you have to do is connect, and then there's actually 2 voice modes.
Hello, how are you today?
So
What can I help you with?
immediately the conversation is created. So whenever you establish a WebSocket with the real-time API, the first thing that comes back from the server is this, session created, session updated. Sorry, session updated, session created up here. You're going to see both client and server events coming back and forth. And so the server ones are what's coming back, what the application essentially is listening for, and the client are the ones that are actually sent to the WebSocket. And you're going to see all of these logs pop up as we interact. And so there's 2 voice modes that you can have. You can have either manual, where you kind of push to talk, or this VAD mode, which is really cool. And I think Aparna, what do you think? I think that's the one to demo really quick because it's kind of cool to see.
Yeah. I mean, there's 2 different modes here. You already talked about that, maybe the manual and the
Yeah. That's what
Yeah.
I was just, chatting on. So there's this manual where you can push to talk, and then I'll demonstrate the VAD mode because I think that's like you gotta
Yeah.
see almost to to understand. So here we go. Hey, can you tell me about the weather in San Francisco?
Sure. In San
Actually,
Francisco,
never
right?
mind. I want you to actually tell me about the weather that's in Seattle instead.
In Seattle,
No,
right?
I actually just want you to tell me what's a good time to visit London.
The best time to visit London is during the spring, March to May, when the temperatures are mild and the city's parks are green and blooming. However, late spring through summer, June to August, is
Okay.
also a popular
The
time,
only thing I
as the
hate is you
weather is
can't stop it.
warmer and there are numerous events and festivals. Fall can be a lovely time to visit as
Um,
well, with
yeah,
fewer
so you can see it kind of
and the
going back
city's
and forth there.
bonfires. It really depends on what kind of experience you're looking for.
So what I want to kind of demonstrate with that is just the how quick it is able to respond to audio there, that you can kind of see in this is as it was starting to talk, I would interrupt it and it would capture my audio and kind of reset the conversation. And I think it would be cool, Aparna, to if we go through, some of those logs here, to actually see and kind of go back and forth.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, the voice activity detection mode is actually pretty awesome. So essentially it just detects when the user, the client's actually speaking, um, and then stops itself or decides to, if the client wants to interject, or if the client is speaking, detect what they're actually saying and capture that, as opposed to the manual where you actually have to say, listen now.
Yep.
You can probably assume there's a number of applications where this would be helpful in, like back and forth. If you're learning, if you're using this to, for example, learn another language, or it's a slightly more conversational, you're having a back and forth conversation, you don't need to press and then talk. You can just talk and interrupt. And if it's going off the rails, say, actually, no, that's not what I want. And so there's probably a lot of applications where the VAD mode's going to be extremely useful.
I agree. I think it's like that natural conversation item of like, not having to wait for it to respond to then go back, because you can just like in the moment change your mind or give it more context to kind of guide its response. So I agree. I think the VAD mode is going to be what we'll see in a lot of applications.
Yeah. Maybe we can go through some of the logs here actually. So,
Yeah.
and you could pull up the API. So there's all of these logs that, as Sally was talking, that were being emitted. And if you go through the OpenAI documentation, actually, there's a number of these, client events and server events. So client events are the things that essentially the client, or in this case, Sally was saying, and then the server is kind of um, the server on the other end. Um, and maybe you could just go to some of them so we could take a look at some of the logs here.
Yeah, I think item created might be a good one to kind of start with because that's an easy one to kind of pick out here.
Yep. You want to just go to the actual console one? We could
Yeah,
take
sure.
that one. Yep.
So let's see.
So
This is uh, too close. Sorry, this one here is what we're looking for, I think.
awesome. And maybe actually before we go into this conversation item created one, I'll just give a little bit of, maybe if you scroll to the very top, so there's kind of that client. So what's kind
Mhm.
of happening behind the scenes is that, is this the very top one actually,
This is
Sally?
the very top.
Oh,
Yep.
okay, got it. Can
So
you
this
go
is
to
when
the,
we first connected to the WebSocket here.
oh, awesome. Okay. Can you go to the one where you said something?
Yep. I think that this is going to be, it's the hello one. And then you're gonna start seeing kind of like session update here. And then you're seeing my audio come in here, and all of these client ones is where this is like the initial item created here.
Awesome. Can you go to the one where your audio is uploaded and then the transcript occurred?
Yeah.
So basically, here, Sally spoke something, and she was like, "Hi, blah blah. What's the weather in San Francisco?" And then obviously she interrupted it. Um, but what's happening is basically there's a audio file that's being created and then being pushed up to the server. So that's being sent over the wire. Is that essentially this one? And
It's
then,
this one here. The transcript's not showing here, but you can imagine that it would have that. What's the weather in San Francisco that we're seeing here, right here.
and then essentially you know, as that audio file goes over the wire, then there's a uh, transcript that's actually created on that. So you can see here, even in the conversation, kind of below the event section here, there's the actual voice to text that's also happening. And this is actually, I think in the OpenAI docs, this was the Whisper model that's actually being used here. But essentially, for each of these sessions, there's perfect, yeah. And you can set that and you can change the model you actually want to use. But essentially, what's happening is that there is uh, an audio file that's being sent over the wire, and then the server actually generates a transcription on top of that audio file, and then that's actually saved to the conversation here.
I think one thing to note and to not get confused here, because I've had a few folks approach me about this, is while they are having this transcription, it's not just a text model sitting on like between, the audio and like GPT here. It is actually getting that audio data. So I think some people thought at first when they gave audio, like, oh, there's just a text model. It's just Whisper sitting on top of it, interfacing the audio and getting the text. That's not actually what's happening here. It can actually pick up like nuanced things like emotion or tone and voice. So I think that's important to call out.
Yep. And then, is there a good transcript one you can show actually, Sally? There we go.
Yeah, let's find one here where you see it.
Server conversation to item underscore. It's at 11198.
111, there it is. Yeah, there it is.
So this is basically, okay, great. So at 11190, I guess, above that is where that's your audio file over there,
Mhm.
where you actually asked about the weather. Went up to the server then did a transcription, and then the transcripts there is, can you tell me about the weather? And then in this case, this is actually where, uh, Sally's question actually got shown up in the conversation section down below. And then after that, there's an actual tool call that's being made. This is really cool because now you can use tools with a voice as a medium. Yeah, maybe you can talk and explain a little bit of that actually, Sally, too.
Yeah. So what you're actually doing is, I mentioned before, like the WebSocket gets created. That's where the session is established. And so the second part of that is like updating our session, and that's where we actually give the API access to the tool. So if we kind of go all the way back up to the top here, you can see there's a tool section. This probably looks familiar if you've used their like chat completions API. You usually send through, available tools. So we're doing the same thing here. And so I'm going to skip the memory one. It's not as relevant here. I'm going to look at the get weather one. So you can see here, this looks just like, because it is the chat completion dictionary parameters that we send through to just any of their completion APIs. And so you can see here, we have the name, we have a description for it, and we have all of our parameters, including the ones that are required. You can see here that it is set to auto. So, just like with any other application, if we have tool calling available in the auto setting, it's going to take the user's response, look at a tool calls, and choose one if relevant. So what we're seeing here is that audio input came in. And you're also, I think another important note is like, you'll see often like all of these audio buffers. So it is kind of chunking that audio and processing it bit by bit. So you'll see a lot more events than we'll go through today. Um, so it's getting that transcription, and then what it is doing here is saying, okay, I've taken a look at that input here, tell me about the weather in San Francisco, and now I'm actually going to call the function of get weather, and we're going to get back all of the data here. So that's what you're seeing here, is it actually called that function, and this is the data that comes back from the API. So it's actually got the input, it called the function to get API data back, and now it's going to call essentially the LLM again. And you can see that down here as well. So input came in, function call, function output, and now I actually interrupted it. So it's not going to actually give me a response. So if we kind of keep going through here, you can see here that there's going to be a new item created. And if we go through here, you're going to see again that audio buffer coming from the client. That's me. And eventually we'll get to, after all of these deltas and appends, we'll get to the transcript done. Where is it? It's so hard. Here it is. Where, oh no, this is actually, it's transcript, sorry. From the server. I need the client transcript done. Which is going to be, I think, down here. Yeah. So this is where it's actually calling weather again. Where is my... Oh, this is an important thing too. So once I started talking again in the middle of it, trying to respond back to me, it actually gives a response cancel. So it's saying actually stop talking essentially, because we're getting more audio coming in. And let's see if we can find that other conversation item. There's a lot of events happening here. Yeah, this is where I first said it. Why can't I find it? Do you see it, Aparna? There's so many items here.
No.
Okay, so yes, here it is. Here's my input audio coming in. And that response output of get weather being called now. So this is where I've actually called. And there are I will say like one of the tricky things about the event-based is some events are faster than others coming back to the listener. So what you're seeing here and why I had such confusion for a moment there is I'm actually seeing it send my audio. I'm seeing the response being interrupted, and I'm seeing the LLM pick the function call before actually my transcript was done. And so there is some kind of nuance with the real-time API if sometimes different pieces move faster than others. And so looking at the logs can be a little bit confusing. So that's what we're essentially seeing here is it actually decided to call my function before it actually heard back from the server with my transcription. So now we can see that second one here, and we would see that kind of process repeat. So another thing I wanted to call out is when I actually asked my final question, what's a good time to visit London? You'll actually see if we come all the way down here that it didn't make any function selection here. It just kind of used, GPT knowledge to answer the question. So you kind of see here, it acts just like you would expect any agent where it's not having to call a function, but can if it needs to. Do we want to take a step back maybe, Aparna, and chat through like all of the different types of events, the events that we have found to kind of be helpful?
It's a great idea.
I'm going to jump into this slide just super quick. So we spent, I think, a lot of time kind of going back and forth with the events, looking in the logs just as you did. And as you can see, like there's a lot of different events that come back and forth from the API. And that kind of inspired us to be like, all right, well, what are the ones that we cared about? Even if you noticed as we were walking through that, Aparna and I were looking for specific events to have certain information in them. And so these are some that we've identified to be, really helpful. So I think session created, that's good to know because that's like the first event that comes in once you establish your WebSocket. So that says like, okay, we've connected to the WebSocket, sessions created, you can now kind of begin. You're going to want to use session update whenever you want to make changes. So going back to the console here, when the WebSocket was created, there was a session established, but then for this application, that session needs to be updated so that it has things like the transcription turned on. It has things like the tools available to it. So if you are developing with the real-time API, the first step you'll probably take is updating your session. So it has the proper tools. And another thing is also updating these system settings. So there is a set of default instructions that come when you connect, and you can of course update these to be specific for your application. So that session created and updated. Now the conversation events that we found to be really important to look at, and there's a ton there, is item completed and item created. So these would actually probably be switched. So item created. So this is whenever there's a new item created within the conversation. So what does that mean? Well, looking here, you can see item created. This was the first item from the actual LLM coming back of saying, hey, how are you doing? And then we also see, these item created when we start getting, the input audio. So it's anytime there's some kind of conversation item being added, whether it's from actually the server or the client. This is one that you can have on both sides of it. Another important one is going to be the item completed. And this is really important because this is going to signal that something's been fully processed. And like when we start thinking about like instrumentation and actually paying attention to the data, this is what's going to be, I don't even know if we have here it is. I don't know if we have one of these because I interrupted it so many times. Yeah, here it is, that conversation item. Nope, completed.
One of the things, Sally, maybe you could go through here is like, okay, so there's client and server, and then
Yeah,
there's like if you go back to the docs, I think that was interesting for a second to just like,
sure.
oh, there's client events and then there's server events. Um, Client events are anything that's actually coming from, you know, in this case, it's Sally talking because Sally is kind of the app itself is kind of an individual talking and that data being sent over the wire. But
Mhm.
this client could be plugged into any application. And it could be modified to um, that application specifically. So if it's like a voice translation, whatever it is, like the client's essentially what's the input's coming from the, I guess, the user. It's a way to think about it.
And this can also be things like the output of like the function. So for example, when it ran that that function of get weather and called the API to get the data there, this then created, you can see it, it's an item created and is going to the client there. So it can be, either that voice or if there's a different component working that could also supply, the client-based event to the WebSocket.
Yeah. And then I think the other interesting part that I thought was that there's the audio file. uh, where does this audio file uh, exist, I guess?
Yeah, so it exists in a few different places. I think the place that I've identified it being the most clear is kind of through the conversation item created. So you'll notice that there's repetition of data in certain events. But something, and that's why I called out this one specifically, item created is going to hold a lot of that data. And so it will hold this content essentially. And that's where we're passing in not only that base 64 encoded audio bytes, but also, text from the transcript if it's there. Sorry, transcript's down here. So that's where it's mostly getting passed is the input. Now you'll also see it on things like those audio buffer events or the message append events. But I like to, when I'm looking for that audio piece, I usually look for this item created event here. Can I answer your question?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so maybe now we can move into just some of the interesting. So this is kind of how the API works. This is how
Mhm.
you can actually use it. Um, how does someone think about even evaluating these types of applications?
That's a really good question. How I've been thinking about it is actually like it's a two-part kind of evaluation. One is I think we're going to have text appear in a lot of these, whether it's just transcripts or maybe it's audio in, text out, or vice versa. There's going to be a layer of text evaluation. And I think you're going to rely on the existing evaluations for text, like things like maybe QA correctness, using the transcript and the output transcript or just the text, whatever the modal is. Um, and then there's going to be an audio component where we're actually looking at the audio files that are going in and out. And I mentioned before, like, this is not just a text model that's sitting between, the user and the LLM. It's actually getting that audio data. So you're going to want to pay attention to things like how well was that transcript actually done? If you're showing a transcript to a user, you're going to want to assess like, was that transcript done well? So it's almost on like the whisper or transcription model side of things. I think there's also just taking into account things like user tone, user kind of maybe like inflection when they're talking. You're going to want to evaluate that. I think you're also going to want to evaluate things like the audio coming out, like how natural was the audio that was generated? Was the audio generated like coherent? Was it informative to the user? All of that kind of like true audio based factors, I think we're going to want to evaluate here. So I see it on both sides.
Yeah.
Curious to know what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think this is just because it's a different medium. You're right. There's the text side, there's also the actual audio side. And the audio side could mean, I mean, we've already heard examples from people of things like, is the tone consistent? Does the, um, you can evaluate, you could potentially evaluate for things you could have never evaluated in text, like,
Yeah,
um, is there anger in the tone of the user? Um,
totally.
and is the tone consistent? And um, are they speaking fast? There's just so
Mhm.
many things that is you can add a layer of evaluation on top, just
Yeah,
audio file itself. There's also the audio text interaction that you can evaluate on. So is the transcript, like you were saying, is the transcript generated correctly off of the audio? Um,
totally.
and yeah, so there's kind of like that interplay of text only, audio text interplay. And then also with things here like the function calling and the tool calling,
Mhm. Yeah,
like there was parameter extraction that you could do off of the inputs of text. Did it correctly do the parameter extractions? You know, when you ask the question of like locations in San Francisco or weather in San Francisco, it correctly detected that. So there's all sorts of these that there's a layer
totally.
I need to do for audio. Um, if I'm honest, I mean, I'm just excited about all of the potential applications that can be built
Yeah,
on this. Um, so a little bit of going through with you all about the API and how this works is just that it's freaking easy to use. It and I think that the possibilities um is enormous right now with
yeah. And I like wrote down just like a few things that I think could be so like those that natural communications like you can really imagine all like the conversational applications that could be implemented with voice. There's that hands-free operation or even people who like younger children or younger individuals who may not like be able to type or spell things, but they can talk and they can ask assistance in that way. So you can think about the entry points to these applications. I think there's also ability for things like accessibility with having these audio outputs and that kind of emotional nuance of being able to control how the LLM talks. It makes them more human in a way by having this kind of modality available. So I'm definitely excited about all of the applications and um, I think it's interesting too. I think there will be components where the real-time API makes sense, but they also just released this for their chat completions too. So when we talk about like, any, applications that might already be using the completions API, now they just like instantly will have voice and audio available to them through that as well, which I think unlocks like even more. So there's like I see there's real-time applications where you need that speed, you need that conversational component, and then there's applications where the completions API might just work. It's just an additional modality that you can support.
yeah. Yep, agree. Cool. Well, I think that was it from us that we wanted to go through today. Is there anything else you wanted to talk through, Sally?
No, I think this is really it. Is there any questions, audience, if you want to drop them in the chat, happy to answer them. But I think the TLDR that I wanted folks to get away is, the real-time API is here. It's super fast. There's very minimal latency. It supports function calling, so it's actually useful. It's not just like a shiny voice. It's really got all of the power to create advanced applications with it. It's WebSocket based. That's really, I think, important because that's how it's able to accomplish that really fast response time, and that there's a ton of applications that this could be used for. I think that's the main takeaways I wanted everybody here to have.
Awesome. 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 Cool. Well, thanks everyone so much for joining and thanks, Sally, for doing the overview.
Yeah, and check out the API console if you're wanting to understand this technology a little bit more.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all. See ya. Bye.